Hey,
All right, we got it. What's up,
figured it out.
Lauren?
Hey, not a lot. What's up with you, Noe?
Nothing much. Just hanging out here. I was just giving everybody a quick preface on who you are, what you do, your background, where you worked at a couple different schools with preschool students and high school students, and then also that you love to travel, you love your
Yeah,
kids, they test your patience. Um,
all the
But yeah, so I just gave them, I prepped them all, and I let them know that this is an opportunity to ask you questions to learn about what it takes to become a counselor, maybe what you do. So could you just maybe give me or give us a quick bio of who you are and what it is that you do for work?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Lauren Yoder. I am a professional counselor here in Boise. Before that, I was a school counselor. My original undergrad is in elementary education, so that's how I ended up in school counseling. I really like working with kids. I think Noe maybe told you about 5 years. So I've worked in preschools, elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. And I was an RA, both at Boise State and Purdue, where I went to grad school. So I like working with people. I switched into this job last year, and I've just never really looked back. It's something completely different, but I love it. Every day I go in, and it's something a little bit different and really fulfilling.
Yeah, and I think I touched on you work on relationships, careers. What are the types of things that you do in terms of uh, the conversations that come up or the topics that you cover as being a professional counselor?
So, I cover a pretty broad spectrum of things. I do relationship work with couples. I do some family counseling with kids and parents and siblings. I do a lot of individual work. Right now, with everything that's going on in the world, things are a little bit unsettled and a little bit unbalanced. So, I talk to a lot of people about anxiety, depression, all sorts of things. I see a lot of high school kids because right now, especially for you high school seniors, it's crazy train, right? Like nothing looks the way that you thought it would. And there's a lot of disappointment, a lot of anxiety of what's going to happen, what's next. And so I do a lot of how do we make sense when the world around us doesn't make sense? How do we make sense of it in our own brain in order to kind of get through the day to day?
Yeah. And so you went in for elementary education, and Jordan just asked a question if you mainly work with kids, and you worked with kids a lot prior to school, and you still to some extent. Could you maybe answer, let's see, Jordan's question out, and I think I have a follow-up for that.
Yeah, so I worked with kids a lot, obviously, when I was in the school. And I thought when I went into private practice that I was really going to work a ton with kids in private practice. I actually went to NNU and got most of the credits that they offer in play therapy because I thought, man, I'm going to go into play therapy practice and do all this work with kids. But the more I started working with adults, the more I went, man, I also really like working with adults. So it's kind of a mixed bag right now. I work a lot with kids, but I also work a lot with grown-ups too.
Yeah, and so coming from working in a school setting, what's the main difference between a school counselor and maybe being a professional counselor, or what? And then maybe what was it that attracted you to becoming a professional counselor versus working in a school setting?
Yeah, okay. So being a school counselor is a lot of things. You wear
Hmm.
a ton of different hats. So when I worked at schools, I would do everything from classroom guidance lessons. Maybe you guys have had some in your own school. I would do small groups, like we'd eat lunch together and talk about a certain topic, like how to be a friend or anxiety, focus, organization, that kind of stuff. And I would see kids who were just kind of struggling, right? They would come to my office and we would chat. I also worked a lot with parents on parenting things and helping their kids be successful in school. I worked a lot with teachers on how to work with kids who were struggling in their classrooms. As a professional counselor, I do a lot less um, a lot less of the other things, I guess. So, in addition to those things as a school counselor, I also did lunch duty and recess duty and bus duty and all the things. So, obviously, as a professional counselor, I don't have to do any of those things anymore. I just get to talk to people and I just get to help them work their problems out, which was my favorite part, of the school counseling gig.
What do you think um, drew you to becoming a counselor? Like, what do you think? kind of set off that switch in terms of maybe even before high school or after high school or during that? This is because you needed a lot of education. I think you mentioned BSU, Purdue, NNU. Um,
Hmm.
so it was a intentional pursuit. How did that come up?
So it's actually really funny. I was doing my student teaching in my undergrad out in Indiana with a fourth grade class. And I was struggling. I was really struggling because actually teaching is not my strong suit, it turns out. And so I was stressed a lot of the time. But I remember there was this one kid and he was really awkward and just didn't have any friends and he really struggled. And the teacher that I was working under really didn't like him very much. So he just didn't really love school very much and he got in trouble all the time. And I remember at one point, I was sitting in the classroom with him just going, what do you want? Like, what are you after here? And he
Yeah.
said he wanted to be an Air Force pilot. And I thought, I know an Air Force pilot. My brother is an Air Force pilot. So I had my brother FaceTime this little fourth grader,
Hmm.
from Colorado Springs, where he was training to be an Air Force pilot. And
Yeah.
like, just connecting them and seeing like how this kid turned it around at that point, I was like, that's what I want to do. I don't want to teach kids. I want to help kids,
Yeah.
actually. Mm-hmm.
You're speaking my language, connecting those dots. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure we address this one because I think this is a really good question. So Bryce is asking, how do you work with people now because of the virus?
So, when everything with COVID kind of started going crazy, we left our office on like a Thursday or a Friday or something. And then we kind of got the call over the weekend, like, hey, we're not going back into the office for the foreseeable future. So it was this really quick shift for pretty many people in the field, like across the globe,
Yeah.
of just having to go, okay, how do we rethink this, right? How do we do counseling and therapy from afar? And obviously, there were places like BetterHelp. That were already kind of had their finger on the pulse of telehealth services. But suddenly all of us had to get trained and all of us had to get ready
Mm.
to do that. So within about a week, we had gone through all these online trainings that helped us deal with the ethical implications of
Yeah.
doing online learning. And then we've been doing it. Actually, today was my first day back in the office and I went, man, I really miss like being around my clients.
Yeah.
I love able to help and still talk to them via we use a program called Doxy at my office. It's just kind of like Zoom but a little more for medical professionals or
Like
counseling.
HIPAA sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is really really cool to be back in the office now, as much as I can be, and being around people in person again.
Yeah. And I feel like, well, I guess was that a challenge maybe? Doing the whole, virtual connection?
Yeah, it's interesting because our brains are trying to connect because there's somebody in front of us and we're trying to talk to them, right? But our bodies are saying, but there's not actually anyone here. So there's all this cognitive dissonance between what we're meaning to do and what's actually happening, right? So it's exhausting. Like it's much more exhausting to do counseling uh, via like Zoom or Doxy or whatever, than it is to do it in person because you're not actually able to make that physical association with there being an actual person there with you.
Yeah. And Bryce, real quick, if you're still on, man, go ahead and shoot me a DM. I'll send you some swag and we'll figure out what a good mailing address is for you. All right? Great question, buddy. Um, so I have a question on that now too. Do you see, and you touched on this with the prevalence of high school seniors or just anybody in general right now, kind of with the whole uncertainty of what's going on, and there's just any plans that they had going down the road, anxiety starts building up.
Mhm.
What do you see the future of counseling being in terms of one, maybe the demand, and then two, just the provision of it, like how you're gonna, provide the counseling?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a really big spike. We already are in people who are seeking counseling services than previously, because I think collectively we've experienced this global trauma, and it's going to be years of just managing that, right? The uncertainty, the anxiety piece. Suddenly, you have a whole generation of kids or budding adults who really didn't have a framework for something of this scale,
Yeah.
who now, I mean, it's just made up into the fabric of who we are, right? That uncertainty or that idea that like what we thought we knew
Mhm.
could just be sort of taken away and changed in a moment. Um, Honestly, I don't think it's a terrible thing, that more people are seeking counseling services because, and I have to say this maybe because I am a counselor, but I think counseling is good for everyone
Yeah.
in all different stages of life. I do think you are going to see a lot more of this shift towards professionals in my field being willing and able to do telehealth than were before.
Mhm.
I didn't know anyone really, maybe one other counselor who was really doing that. And now, pretty many of us, I know for myself, probably a third of my clients are still preferring to do telehealth. So I think we're going to have to be ready to see that shift of people kind of going, oh man, like this is a really cool avenue that's available. So why don't we use it?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I had this conversation last time with our last AMA session. We were talking about how things have changed so rapidly and kind of drastically in terms of some professions. So it's almost like a preface of pre-COVID and then during slash post-COVID.
Mm.
What do you think? Let me say, what was the biggest challenge that you had pre-COVID, and maybe what was also the most rewarding part pre-COVID, and what are you going to see being the most challenging part and maybe the most rewarding part once we start seeing the dust settle a little bit?
Hmm. I think pre-COVID, the thing I had to worry about the most was like people canceling or just like
Mm,
not showing up for their appointments, right?
yeah.
Uh, which kind of has been mitigated a little bit by this availability of telehealth because I can just call up my clients and say, hey, if you can't make it into the office, can we just do this online? And it's a lot easier for people to access services. So there's, I mean, very few cancellations at this point. So that's pretty great. Um, I think, living in the new normal kind of post COVID, it is going to be this. Um, if you think about it, counseling is one of those professions where you want to feel a connection to someone else and kind of feel nearer to someone, like somebody's supporting you. Whereas, like, if you have to go into a counseling office and wear a mask or wash
Mhm.
your hands a bunch of times or do things, it kind of keeps you in that heightened state of like, we can't really connect, we can't really get close to each other, we can't like forget about this thing that's causing us a lot of anxiety. And I think that's going to be a challenge to help people find sort of peace and balance and settledness in the new normal while still having to live within the boundaries of like keeping ourselves and each other safe.
Yeah. Um, what so I wanted to stay on topic with the school because I think that was going to maybe translate into just the trajectory that you've had. But I think now I also want to say, or I want to ask, um, if somebody is in high school right now and they want to consider being, okay, and well, actually, you know what, let's answer low J55's question because we're on the topic right now. So when you first started telehealth, how did you feel like you didn't cover, how did you feel like you didn't cover as much as you wanted?
Yeah, I definitely do feel like I didn't cover as much as I wanted because a lot of that time then had to be like, okay, like we're getting used to this kind of weird way that we're doing it now, right? And honestly, like for the last few months, I feel like with pretty many of my clients, especially kid clients or high school clients, it has just been, hey, how's it going? You want to like play a card game, like
Mm,
over the screen,
yeah.
whatever. It's just have that person who's there kind of saying, I'm here, I'm still here. Like we're gonna forego these other issues we were working on for right now and just be there for each other, right? Because now suddenly you've got this big trauma going on. And it's hard. I mean, besides that, it's just hard to kind of cover some of the things that you would cover in an office visit via telehealth.
Mhm. Um, and great question, low J55. Also, just DM me and we'll figure out, we'll send you some swag. I got a bunch of swag over here with your name on it. Just make sure you DM me and we'll coordinate something. Um, what do you think is the biggest misconception right now in terms of being a professional counselor or a counselor?
It's so funny. I say this all the time. I don't even think it's a new misconception. I think that people have always had this misconception. Like if you're a counselor or a doctor or something, people look at you and go, well, they know everything because they're the expert, right? They're the expert. And what I tell my clients all the time is I may have a lot of life experience and I may have like kind of by proxy had a lot of other people's life experience to draw from,
Hmm.
but you're always going to be the expert on your own life. So if you're ever in counseling, or even if you're at a doctor's appointment or something, you're going, man, that doesn't sound right, or that doesn't feel right, what you're saying to me, always look at your counselor or somebody like in a position of authority over you like that, and just say, I don't know about that. Like, let's talk about that. Let's question it, right? It's a misconception to believe that just because I have an advanced degree in counseling, that I'm going to know your life better than you do or
Mm.
anybody else.
Wow. Um, what would you, so let's say hypothetically, we have teens right now that are watching this or are going to watch this when we post it later, and they're considering becoming a counselor, or maybe doing something in terms of having that inner personal relationship with somebody to help them just develop better habits or just develop successful traits. What would you what kind of advice would you give to somebody who's considering this sort of trajectory?
Um, I would say be cautious, because if you have the kind of personality that lends itself well to this kind of career, my guess is you maybe are a little bit of a nurturer or a caretaker or like a fixer. And the thing that I've had to learn doing this job is like, you can't fix anyone and you can't caretake them and you can't, I mean, you can nurture and you can support, but you also have to kind of take a step back and think about your own mental well-being.
Hmm.
Right. I think sometimes we fall in that trap of like, we want to give the advice. If you're the advice giver, you know, that's what you do. Whereas counseling is a little bit less advice giving and a little bit more putting it back on the other person and going, okay, what do you think about that? What do you want to do about it? Right.
Yeah.
So take care of your own mental well-being and your own emotional well-being first, and support out of that rather than trying to fix it for other people or give them advice.
Okay. That is really good advice. Um, and we got another question that came in here. Is it better to go to a counselor you don't know personally, or does that not matter?
Well, ethically and legally, someone who knows you in real life can't be your counselor. So you have to go to someone who doesn't have like a connection with you or your family.
Okay. But if you want to
Hmm.
talk to a friend,
Right.
yeah, but not necessarily wouldn't be your like professional counselor, I guess, in that situation. Um, so I'm just considering different types of jobs, and some of the ones that we've had here with the Ask Me Anythings. I think being a counselor uh, is one of those where you might always have the on switch in terms of your job. How do you hit that off switch in terms of, because I think maybe even to the question that came up, which was a great question, Devaboo 58, was, let's say a friend seeks you out because they know that you're a professional counselor. Like, how do you turn the off switch on, or how do you turn off the switch?
Yeah, and so I'm not always the best about doing that. You know, sometimes I don't even realize it's happening. People come to me and ask me a question, and I get very invested. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, like I'm doing my job for free right now with you. For the most part,
Yeah.
uh, I definitely try to be really cautious, like with my friends and family, with it. And if it's somebody that I think like, oh, this is an issue that really you do need to talk to somebody about, I'll typically refer them to someone and say, hey, I actually know someone who's really good. If you want their name and number, so that you can go talk to them. I also, I've gotten much better since COVID happened at finding that work-life balance, because working at my home, has forced me to go, man, when the workday is over, I have to shut my computer and I have to leave it alone, right?
Yeah.
Because it still has to be my home. It can't just be my work all the time.
Yeah, and I think mental health is definitely, I mean, it was a big part of this conversation, and it's just very prevalent in a lot of conversations that we have now. So with you, because you also, I don't know if you, well, maybe do you absorb any of the work that you get? Because I'm assuming that there are some conversations that you have that are a little bit more lighthearted, and some of them are just a little heavier in terms of the substance. One, how do you deal with that? And then two, how do you balance that out in terms of, outside of work, to not let that consume you?
Hmm. It's definitely a learning process. I did it a lot more in my very early years at a school. My first school that I ever worked in was in a pretty rough town, where all the kids came from pretty kind of rough home lives. And I wanted to take all of that home. I wanted to, save all of them. And that's where I really internalized that, like, oh, you can't actually save anyone. You have to teach them the skills that they need to manage in whatever life they have, because that's all any of us can do, right? Is manage in whatever life that we have. Some of those were pretty hard not to take home. Like I said, with kids, it's a lot harder because as a grown up, I'm like, I just want to take you all home with me and like love you. But with adults, it's a little bit easier. It's a little bit easier to kind of go, okay, I can separate myself a little bit from you because I know that you have more resources to manage.
Mm-hmm. And what do you do outside of work to kind of keep that chi energy at like a good level so that you maintain a good just mental health?
So I really do. I try to decompress on the way home. I listen to music. I sing really loud in my car, or I like if I'm particularly rough like
Yeah.
evening, I'll talk about it a little bit with people who are close to me who don't know any of these situations or any of the people, and just kind of go, oh, it was a really rough day. I think having those support people, no matter what job you're in, is really imperative. Yeah, like no matter what you do, because everybody's going to have a rough day at some point. But I think sometimes offloading some of that from your brain just kind of out into the ether is really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, I try to give myself like a window. Like I have this much time to decompress about it and like think about it. And then once I'm home, right?
Yeah.
Done. I have 2 kids. I'm a single mom. I try to be engaged with them. And, I don't have room in my brain for both of those things
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah, I can see that. Bryce has another question. Do you think a health coach and a counselor are similar in a way?
I really do. I think the thing you have to remember about a life coach or a health coach or any of these things is that typically, and I say that because there are some that are actual licensed counselors, but most of them are not. Most of them are just the helpers that we talk about. Like they are the advice givers of their friends, or they're really empathetic, or whatever. Um, Most of the time, because they're not licensed, they do not take insurance, and they will charge you a lot more than going
Mm,
to a counselor. So it's an interesting. I've definitely like looked into it. And there are some similarities and some differences, but I think you could get some similar things just depending on what you're looking for. And I think if you're looking for something more targeted, like a business coach, like to help you with your career, there are a lot of those out there that are very good. It's just essentially people saying like, I don't have a license, I don't have the formal, training,
mm-hmm.
but I have the experience, or I have the knowledge just from my personal life.
Um, so, Lauren, I know you, and just for everybody, I know Lauren. She's great, and every time I talk to her, like I almost feel like I just kind of get a lot more relaxed talking to her. And I don't know if anybody else notices this, but it's just like it's a very calming sort of. So that's I think why you're so good at your job. But you've also evolved with your trajectory in terms of even just now being a professional counselor outside of the school setting. Where do you see yourself in 5 years, and what would you like to be in terms of whether it's the clients, your environment that you're working in? What would you like to be doing, or what would you like to picture yourself doing?
Hmm. Um, Honestly, I could do this job for the rest of my life and be happy doing it. I think there's some things I really want to study and get better at, like in terms of types of clients that I see or types of work that I do, especially around relationships or couples. Okay, so I'm going to show you briefly
Okay.
this little guy. Can you see?
Oh, that's ace.
That's Ace. My goal in the next few years is to figure out how to get Ace a little bit older and a little bit calmer, and train him to be a therapy dog, and
Yeah.
take him right into the office, take him into like peds wings at the hospital, like do stuff. He's a bit of a puppy right now for that, like too puppy for that. But that's my goal, is like I would really, really like to incorporate him into my work and kind of make that a focus of what I do.
That's amazing. You're gonna get a lot of heart emojis with that one. Um, well, Lauren, this really zoomed by, and I want to keep it within the time frame. But I do also just want to acknowledge everybody who's viewing this right now. If you guys have questions about anything that Lauren talked about, or you just want to scratch a little bit more on the surface of what she mentioned, feel free to reach out. Like I mentioned before, text questions that you have to the number 208-208. Just make sure you text BTQ to that number first. And if it's something specifically related to what Lauren said, I'll contact her and maybe we can just get an answer for you. If not, we'll figure it out, whether it's what education you need to become a counselor, what opportunities there are here in Idaho for you, or you're just curious about if you have the right personality, or like in terms of, is empathy important? Like those sorts of questions. You can ask those questions after this is over, and then we'll make sure that we help you out.
And I kind of wanted to ask before we're done, sorry.
Yeah.
If you or anybody you know is seeking counseling or feels like counseling could be beneficial, please reach out to NoARI, and like, if not me, like someone else. I have lots of referrals. I know tons of good clinicians in the field. So take care of yourself and let us help you with that.
Yeah. Definitely make sure that you guys are taking care of yourselves. And I want to just give you the floor really quick for the last sign off. If there's anything that you just want to say, and maybe that was it, or maybe you want to say something else just in terms of for the audience that is watching this, and it could be a 15-year-old up in North Idaho. It could be an 18-year-old who is considering going to college, or maybe wants to go into the workforce, or just somebody who can just be watching this generally. What would you like to leave this Ask Me Anything with?
I would say now, maybe not more than ever, but certainly now, like mental health is so important.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of like I said, be watchful of yourself, be watchful of your friends and family, and just kind of be open to that. And ask for help. It's okay. It's really hard for a lot of people to take that first step to go, man, I'm just not feeling the greatest, and maybe I need to talk to someone, right? Maybe in your family, that's not something that you do. You kind of keep it to yourself. But don't, right? Like reach out to someone, reach out to a friend or a teacher or a coworker or someone, and just say, hey, I'm really struggling right now, right? Because here's the interesting and really magical thing about this group trauma that we're going through is like, everybody is a little bit struggling right now. So chances are good that if you reach out to someone and just say, hey, I'm not doing so well, they're going to look at you and say, me either. I'm so glad you said something,
Yeah.
right? Like, I feel so alone. So I'm glad that you were here. I'm glad that hopefully, you've internalized that it's okay to not be okay, and to reach out for help if you're not.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things too, especially with myself. I've always been very stubborn, but I think I realized that the more I get, the more I interact with people. It's just, we're all human, and we all have these things, whether it's expectations that we put on ourselves or that somebody else puts on us, but we kind of feel like, I don't know. I think there's this shyness that exists, and really the only person that's making us shy is ourselves. So I don't know. I think that was a really good sign off. And Lauren, it's always a pleasure. Honestly, like I just feel super relaxed right now, and I just feel like I can go conquer the highest peak off the green belt. So I'll find a mound of dirt and just go climb it.
Perfect.
Well, thank you, Lauren. I really appreciate you. And honestly, I think this was very insightful and just a good conversation to have. So thank you, Lauren. Thank you, everybody who's watching this. And like I mentioned before, if you do have any questions, make sure you text BTQ to the number 208-208 with anything related to high school or your future. And if you need to talk to somebody, talk to somebody. Don't internalize it. You have somebody here that is a very well-versed individual who can echo that. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. Lauren, take care.
Thanks, guys.
And everybody else who's watching this, take care. Bye, guys.
Bye.